Clemson, not Clemson. I can't do it. I can't do it. SECfans.com. You knew we were going to talk about this one. Clemson and Alabama squaring off in the playoffs again, this time in round one of the playoffs. And both sets of fans, I think, Josh, are familiar with our show, so we won't have to explain too much with the model later. But I do want to tell you up front, if you like this show, give us a like. If you love it, subscribe. If you don't like it, feel free to give us a thumbs down. Just tell us why you didn't like it and what we got wrong. And in the comments, please, please, please give us your score predictions. Give us your MVP. And I don't want to spoil it, but let us know if you think Tua is going to play. We're going to talk about that in a minute. All right, so I want to start with Alabama. We're going to talk about Clemson too. Their listeners are really familiar with us, so they know we've done a lot of their games this year. But Alabama had a bit of a hangover at the end of the season, had a lot of injuries. Mississippi State game, Auburn game, neither game did they look great. They didn't look ready to go. No discredit to either of the teams they played, because they earned either the close loss or the big win from Auburn. But I don't know if Alabama's coming into this. They're kind of backing into the playoffs here while you've got Clemson blowing teams out. Miami, that wasn't even a contest. That was like a kiddie game. They're like, get out of here, Miami. So you've got one team in Clemson that's coming in that's like really hot, and you got Alabama that's really struggling. And Alabama's defense didn't look super great in these games, and I keep going back to the injuries, or we're going to go back to the injuries. But also, some of that is just facing good offenses. When you face good offenses, you're not going to have 3-and-out city. You're going to give up some third downs. You're going to give up some points, and all of it is more than Alabama fans were comfortable with. But all in all, I don't think they played that poorly. I don't think they played poorly at all in either of those games. They didn't give up gobs of points. They just give up gobs of points by Alabama standards. And I would argue, a lot like the Clemson game last year, the defense did their job, but the offense kept giving the ball away so much, not from turnovers, but from 3-and-outs, and not being able to sustain a drive, that the issue was more on the quarterback and more on the offense, and specifically the quarterback. And we thought coming into this season that Jalen Hurts had some things to prove, and he really showed on film throughout the year that he was able to do that, but I think it was a bit of a mirage, and I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. So my theory, and I think it's not a special theory, a lot of people think this too, my theory on Jalen Hurts is when the pressure's not on, he doesn't get in his head, and he's got all the physical tools in the world. He can make NFL throws. He can read the field. If he knows he's playing a team he knows he can beat, and that the defense is going to dominate, and it's not going to be on him, it's like the chains are off. He's completely free to do what he can do and what he's capable of. But we've seen time and time again in Texas A&M 2 years in a row, LSU 2 years in a row, in the playoffs last year, and in Auburn this year, that and those are the only data points we have, when he's facing a team that he knows has the ability to beat him, he shuts down. He can't see the field. He doesn't make throws. And it's more being safe and not wanting to make the big mistake than it is something he can't do. And I just think what we've seen is there's not been enough data points. To showcase his big flaws, so he gets a lot of credit for these situations where he looks so good against even slightly lesser opponents that he's not scared of, and there's so few opportunities to see him melt down that it might be attributed to maybe something else than his inability. So am I off here? Am I crazy? Or is there a serious fatal flaw here that's going to really be a problem against this Clemson defense?
So I think first off, obviously you can't be completely and 100% off on that fact, because it's just sort of completely true. You can't dispute the fact that Jalen Hurts, when he's played top 25 defenses, consistently has not been able to move the ball overly effectively. And watching the Iron Bowl, there was a play where they zoom in on Jalen Hurts, and as always happens, the commentators are talking about how cool and calm and collected he is, and see the look on his face. And I looked in and I saw him with his He was trying to catch his breath. He was looking from side to side. Wasn't really focusing on the snap. It zoomed out. It's 3rd and 4, Auburn side of the field. Clock winds down. Delay a game. That play really hurt Alabama. And as the commentators were talking about how cool, calm, and collected he was, I saw a guy that looked really nervous. And I think a lot of what happens with Jalen is he's really scared to make the critical mistake. Alabama's receiving core is excellent this year. It is absolutely excellent. And we've kind of sarcastically called this the year of the receiver in the SEC, in large part because most teams have a serious flaw at receiver, and Alabama does not. And Alabama has been able to, I think, to a large degree succeed because their receiving core is able to, operate at a very high level and do what they need to do to be successful. And, they can make plays in space. And I think, the Iron Bowl, Jalen Hurts throws a 50-50 ball kind of across his body downfield, and Jerry Jeudy, the 5-star number 1 overall receiver freshman, jumps up, snatches the ball away, scores a touchdown. Alabama could probably do that play all the time if they wanted to, but Jalen, against really good teams, doesn't want to pull the trigger because he's afraid of what would happen if he does. I thought Jalen was really turning the corner against LSU and Mississippi State because he made some hot reads that he really hadn't made the whole season. The LSU game, I felt like the young receivers dropped some balls they really shouldn't have and really hurt him. There were some other things that went wrong. They were just kind of out of sync. The Mississippi State game, I think a little unfairly, some people talk about that being a close game and put the blame on Jalen. Alabama's offense was pretty darn dominant in the Mississippi State game. They scored extremely quickly. They sputtered a couple times, as every offense does in every game, but they scored consistently, often, and all the way throughout the game. Won the game with the arm, but they scored quickly at the beginning of the game. It was really just one small lull. However, Mississippi State, we flagged going into that game, their defense is really actually kind of bad. And it really wasn't surprising. It was just that they needed to, and they were able to execute. I think the problem is when you have tight coverage, he just doesn't want to make a throw into tight coverage. He doesn't want to make a mistake. And when there is pressure, Jalen really is far too fast to take his eyes down and leave the pocket. And what a lot of teams, I think, have realized is Jalen will leave a clean pocket quickly if he feels like he's getting pressure. He runs himself into pressure frequently. And I think 2 things have really hurt him against really good teams. 1, they frequently blitz off the edge, which means when he leaves the pocket, he tends to roll into a blitz. And 2, very good teams tend to have pass rushers and outside linebackers that can outrun him to the edge. So when he leaves the pocket against bad teams, he can run for a first down and it looks pretty good. When he plays really good teams and he does that, he gets tracked down. Against Clemson, that's a problem because Clemson, with guys like O'Daniel and Farrell, they've got a lot of speed and athleticism on the perimeter. And as much as they're going to cause a lot of pressure to the pocket, Jalen has to be willing to sit in there and 1, to make contested throws, and 2, to take sacks. We talked quite a bit early in the year, and I know we took some heat from Clemson fans because I said the way you attack Clemson, I felt like, was to be very aggressive. And I said that the Virginia Tech game, I think my predicted average score, my predicted average score was 31-17, which was the actual score. But I said I didn't think that was going to be likely to be the case. I thought they were going to have to be very aggressive in that game. 3 out of 4 times they would get blown out. 1 out of 4 times they might win. And I felt like that's what a lot of teams really have to do against Clemson because the front, if you try to play them straight up, that front 4, front 7, it's going to eat you alive. You have to take some risks because you don't have time to get guys wide open. And when you're that good in the front 7, Clemson doesn't have to take a lot of chances. Same thing they did against Auburn. On one play, I watched Auburn go into max protect. They had 3 guys in the pattern, and Clemson brought 4. And those 4 guys got pressure. So if you're going to go max protect and your opponent feels like they can drop 8, then you've got 3 guys in the pattern, and they've got 7 guys defending. So everybody's double covered, and you have a safety over the top. Beyond that, nobody's going to be wide open in that situation. You either have to make really difficult contested throws, or you have to take a risk, and Jalen isn't really able or willing to do either one of those. So I think your answer is, I think it is difficult, but I will turn the coin a little bit, and I think this is a problem for both teams. It doesn't really behoove Alabama to rely on Jalen's arm and try to accomplish this if that's the kind of guy he is. I think one of the big mistakes the past few games is they've kind of forgotten what their identity was when they were successful. They're a run spread team. They focus on the running backs. They use the quarterback to leverage the running backs and strain you horizontally, trying to contain their run game. Clemson can be run on to a certain extent. And if Alabama wants to have success, I think they're almost better off really focusing on the run and occasionally throwing it and making Clemson put the resources there to succeed. The problem is, and this is why I don't think Alabama is screwed, Clemson is now the same sort of team. This is not Deshaun Watson. This is not a West Coast spread passing attack anymore. They have now transitioned to the run spread, and interestingly to me, they have the same flaw. I think we can get into a little bit how good Kelly is as a passer, and I think he may be in some ways a little bit better, in some ways maybe a little bit worse in other areas. They also rely on this zone spread run attack, and both those types of offenses can really be shut down. I think when you watch Ohio State and what they've been able to do, and a lot of other teams, I think they both can struggle at times. They both can succeed in times. And I want to come back to this, but I've spoken long enough. I want to give you a chance to comment. But I think you can talk about why they're screwed and talk about the problems, but everything we talk about is going to come back around to the fact that with the new quarterback in the situation Clemson's in, I don't know that they're actually any better off than Alabama is.
I think part of me feels like that's the case, but I wonder. So you mentioned rushing, and I'm sure Clemson fans are going to bristle a little bit at the fact that you said they can be run on, but last year this same Alabama team, or actually I would say a little worse offensively Alabama team, ran for 6.5 yards per carry, and Bo Scarborough was just eating their lunch until he went down. Now, a lot of Alabama fans say that he's the reason, like if he stayed in that game, Alabama won the game. I don't know that that's true. I think at some point Clemson has a good enough defense to adjust to that style of run if that's all you can do, if that's all you're effective with. So we know Nick Saban is very, I don't know, I want to say set in his ways. I think that's a fair thing to say. And it is completely uncharacteristic for him to do something like put in a backup quarterback who has a different makeup in terms of what he brings to the table than the one he's been riding this whole year. But I'm going to ask you, because we need to talk about it, what are the odds that Nick Saban would look to Tua? I'm not even going to say to start or to be the quarterback in this game. I think that's a little bit ridiculous. What are the odds that we see Tua in meaningful game time in this game? And if we do see him, what does he bring to the table that could give Alabama an advantage?
I think there's a real chance of it. And, to take away some of your words, and I'll let you comment later if you want, there was some precedent for it. When Saban played the 2011 rematch against LSU, he came out and played a far more aggressive offensive style. My big one example would be 2013 against Oklahoma. Alabama came out following that kick six game, not overly dissimilar to the situation, and they had this young running back that they really hadn't utilized, and this new coordinator they were bringing in named Kiffin said, hey, we should really get this Derrick Henry guy on the field. And Derrick Henry had, I think, 3 touchdowns, like 200 yards on just like 18 touches in that game. It was ridiculous. Oklahoma could not stop him anytime he touched the ball. And everyone kind of sat there scratching their heads going, where did this guy come from? Why haven't we been using him? So I think there is precedent. And I think when Saban comes into this and he's been successful week in and week out, he doesn't like to change. He is risk averse. But when he sees there was a problem that caused him to lose, the guy's competitive and he's willing to make a change if he thinks it's going to make them succeed. I do agree with you. I don't have any expectation that you're going to see Tua starting. I just don't really think it's a possibility. But he has done 2 quarterback systems before. He did it in a national title year. He did it with DeMarcus Russell. And he could do something a little similar. He could say, all right, regardless of how we're doing the 3rd and 4th series, unless we're, scoring just gangbusters, Tua's going in. And we're going to see what that happens there. The fact that you have so long off gives you a chance to get him meaningful reps and prepared to play a meaningful role in a way that that's always the problem with the backup quarterback. You don't have time to make sure he knows the game plan for this team and that you really get him meaningful reps. I think it's notable to understand with all this, it's not really me bashing Jalen. My discussion earlier was I think we've been using Jalen the wrong way. It's Jalen has been a guy for the SEC that came in SEC freshman of the year as a running quarterback. And now all of a sudden we want to see him develop as this pro style passer. And I don't know, maybe it's not realistic for him to be that. And he was brought to Alabama to be developed as an NFL passer. But, to a certain extent, maybe in their effort to make him such, they lost what made him effective. They lost that running game. And maybe really he is an excellent run first quarterback and a very good college run first quarterback, but maybe he's not a passer at the next level. And that's okay if that's the case. He may find a role in a different way. But Tua Tagovailoa for Alabama is an exceptionally good quarterback. And I was curious when I ran the numbers. He hasn't played a ton of snaps. I think he's thrown about 70 passes on the year, but he's 66% passing, 8 touchdowns, 1 interception. If you were to run his QB rating, it would be it is 186.57. 186.57 QB rating. If he were eligible for the national list, that would be second only to Baker Mayfield. He is an NFL quarterback, and it's easy to say that, but everything about it screams NFL quarterback. He can do some things Tua can't. One of the interesting things to me watching Alabama against Auburn and some of the other opponents is a lack of a proper screen game. Alabama can't really execute receiver screens very well. They can't do a ton of stuff with running back screens, but that's probably for other reasons too. But really, it's receiver screens. When teams bring a blitzing corner, one of the easy ways to counter that is you throw a receiver screen because it means they don't have numbers on the receiver screen. And if you have 2 receivers and they walk down a safety, now you're in a situation where you make one man miss and you can score. When you have elite receivers, and Alabama does, that's an exceptionally dangerous thing for a defense to defend. The problem is Jalen Hurts has a very slow release. It's pretty deliberate. He's actually pretty accurate with a football. But when he throws a screen, it takes him a fair amount of time to get his feet set, and he has a windup, and it just takes a while to get the ball out. Tua has an incredibly fast release, one of the faster ones I've seen in recent years. And again, I actually think there are a ton of comparisons to me with him and Baker Mayfield in the way they throw the football, their accuracy, and the speed of the release. And because of that, there are certain things people talk about him like flinging the ball over the field, but it's the same way really with Jalen that, referencing previous years, Blake Sims ran this screen heavy offense with Amari Cooper. And when they brought in Jacob Coker as a quarterback at Alabama, they really took out that component of the offense, and people kind of wondered where it went. Well, it disappeared because Coker could not deliver the ball accurately and quickly enough to get the ball in the hands of the receivers, because a single second on a receiver screen is another second that the DBs have a chance to react, and it makes an incredibly big difference in how effective the screen game is. Hurts is more like Jacob Coker in a lot of ways. Tua is more like Blake Sims. And because of that, Tua is actually, strangely, as much as he can get the ball vertically, he has a big plus in the short to intermediate game just due to the speed of his release. And if Alabama is struggling with Clemson's front four, they're going to need someone that gets the ball out quickly. And I don't know, and no one really knows, how much confidence they have in Tagovailoa's ability to handle pressure and distribute the ball. A lot of freshmen, and I've seen this before from him, just want to throw the ball on every play. They want to get it to someone, and that's disastrous in a high-pressure situation against a good team because you throw interceptions. He has to be willing to take a sack or throw the football away. But if they trust him enough to do that, there may be situations where their offensive line is getting beaten by Clemson's. Jalen Hurts does not have enough time with his release to get the ball out. I think a big part of his problems in the passing game, honestly, is he's hesitant to throw the football because he knows his release is slower and he needs to make sure he has more time to throw. It's hard to anticipate or to react quickly if it takes you longer to throw the football, and you're more sensitive to the rush because when okay, there's a guy coming, by the time I get the ball out now, I'm already going to be hit. Tua sees a guy and he can flick his wrist and throw it. It's a different situation. So I do think there is some merit to the fact that Tua could come in. I'm really curious to see how risk averse Saban is in this regard. I do think if they decide to completely commit to the run and do what they did throughout most of the season, that could benefit them with Jalen. But if they want to be aggressive, and especially if they realize the run isn't working and they realize their offensive line can't hold up, they're going to need someone back there that can throw the ball down vertically, but more importantly, can get the ball out in the short to intermediate game quickly. And I'm not sure Jalen is simply equipped to be able to do that.
So if we're going to talk about Clemson on the other side of the ball, Clemson. If we're going to talk about Clemson on the other side of the ball, if you're looking at the schedule and if you eliminate the Syracuse game, I don't think you can completely eliminate it from your mind because it is a data point that's relevant if we're just talking about defense and if we're just talking about specifically how you need to attack their defense because Syracuse did what Virginia Tech was scared to do. But let's not talk about that game. Let's talk about the rest of their schedule and what you want to see if you're a team that's playing someone who's got a 12-1 clean record in a conference championship are those signs that maybe they're vulnerable. And we don't really have that, do we? We have the Virginia Tech game that I don't think was great, even though they had not starters in at the end of the game. But other than that, the only thing you can look at score-wise is NC State, though I think they beat NC State a lot worse than statistically. If you look at the statistics, I think they beat them worse than the score indicated. So is there a weakness to this Clemson team that Alabama can exploit, or is the only weakness maybe that secondary and Alabama doesn't have the tools to effectively take advantage of that?
We've already noted all the stuff with the secondary, and I know Clemson fans have gone back and forth with us in the comments about that. I don't think it's ridiculous because the same thing we talked about in the Virginia Tech game and where we thought the weaknesses were is exactly what Syracuse attacked. And you can talk about the fact that Kelly Bryant was out in that game, and it was a factor. But the defense wasn't all out injured in the Syracuse game. Syracuse just took a lot of high-risk throws. They were able to complete them. That wasn't a likely thing to happen in a lot of ways, but it worked, and they were able to beat Clemson. I don't even know if I would call that a weakness in certain ways. It's just more an area that can be attacked because Clemson is so dadgum good in the front four and they're so athletic and linebacker that they get pressure and they can really disrupt the inside run. And they're fast enough that they can get lateral and run down the outside run. So it's hard to get the edge. And you put those two together and it's a really darn good defense. Offensively, I think the notable thing is, they scored 30 points or more in basically every game except those right when Bryant got hurt. And like a lot of spread passing attacks, it's really all a run first offense. And they're a lot more balanced than many. But at the same time, everyone keys off that run play. And if they don't fear the quarterback run, it basically frees up another defender. Everything becomes easier. Suddenly they dropped into the 20s in scoring. But the moment it came back, they went right back into the 30s. So I think first off, maybe if there's one area, I would challenge that the defenses that they faced may not have been that great against the run. I don't necessarily buy into Virginia Tech. We really weren't sure when they played because Virginia Tech, frankly, hadn't played anybody. Not that many teams had even by the fifth week of the season. But you look down the rest of that schedule, Syracuse, Georgia Tech, even Florida State, North Carolina State, and South Carolina are not elite run defenses. And, Miami, interestingly, probably was a very good run defense. And I think the notable thing against Miami, Clemson scored a lot of points because Miami turned the ball over. And I neither one of us really felt like Miami was necessarily the real deal, but I think you also have to go back and realize Miami played a crap game against Clemson. They did everything wrong, and it put them out of the game fast. And I think Clemson was probably always going to win that game, but they won by 35 because Miami fell flat on their face offensively. Clemson only had 77 rushing yards in the Miami game. Now, they had a lot of passing yards, but they only averaged 4.41 yards per play. Against Florida State, they averaged 4.61 yards per play. And again, that was another game where Florida State, that was a darn close game in the fourth quarter. It was a 7-point game, and Florida State's Blackman just like he did in several games to end the game, fell flat on his face. And against Auburn, they were held under 100 yards rushing, 4.19 yards per play. So there is repeated precedent that when they have played what is probably a top 20 defense, they've pretty much always been held under 5 yards per play. Now, the trick is they've still found ways to score. Their average point production in those games, 69, 73, 83, 5 by 3. You're averaging about 27 points a game. I mean, that's not bad, being held under 5 yards per play. But you didn't get that against Auburn. And Alabama's defense is probably, in a lot of ways, better than Auburn's. And more notably, Alabama's defense is going to be healthy for the first time since the Florida State game. And I don't know. The same way we talked about how Alabama could have real struggles moving the football, I think Clemson could struggle just as badly. And if that zone read game can be played straight up, and Kelly Bryant doesn't have easy passing opportunities, I think Hunter Renfrow is a very good receiver. Deion Kane has speed. Neither one of them are Mike Williams. And outside of those two, I don't know that they have quite the same level of threats. Eddie On has been very good as running back for them, but outside them, I don't know that any of the backs are particularly special in any way. So I'm not really sure where they have a matchup advantage. And Alabama's secondary has been very, very good. They're going to be one guy here with Hootie Jones. I actually think that's probably a good thing for Alabama because he was probably the weakest link, despite all the injuries against Mississippi State and Auburn. And the replacement, Deontay Thompson, from all accounts, is an exceptionally good player. So, I think, probably Alabama will stick Anthony Averett, the fastest player on their team, on Deion Kane. They'll probably stick Minkah Fitzpatrick, I'm guessing, on Hunter Renfrow, who's more quick than fast. And I think Minkah can probably stay with him, which is unsurprising because both those guys are probably first-round pick defenders, or at least second-round pick defenders. If you take those two guys away, I don't know that Clemson has any advantages in the passing game. Then it becomes a matter of if the run game can win. And, we talked about this a lot in the Oklahoma-Georgia game. Run offenses can be schemed away to stop, much more than a passing offense can be. And the same way that Clemson was able to generate production, regardless of the quality of Alabama's excellent defenses the last 2 years, this goes back to the earlier point. I don't have confidence that a run spread offense will succeed against elite defenses. And more often than not, you have a disproportionate impact where the better the defense, the more it starts to shut down. And when you approach a team like an Auburn defensively, and you run an offense like both Alabama and Clemson do, both Alabama and Clemson scored 14 points against Auburn. And it just really tends to struggle. And I think a lot of times statistics actually lie in this case. Ohio State is the leading team in S&P Plus, and they're the leading team, in my opinion, because they run a heavy run spread offense. And while they played a few top tier teams, at least supposedly in the Big Ten, most of their teams are quite poor. And, they played 4 100th or worse teams. And when you run this type of offense, you tend to dominate bad teams. And I've said this for years, the same way Oregon did. And it's real easy to win 9 or 10 games with the styles of offense. But when you play really, really good teams that have good gap integrity and that can run laterally, all your schematic advantages tend to evaporate. And, it's the passing game that can really find a way to create or make a play, regardless of the quality of the opponent. The run game generally doesn't. This is the same reason why NFL teams tend to be pass first and not run first. They don't run these run spread offenses because when you place defenses at a high level, NFL caliber players, they tend to shut down run spread offenses. So I think Alabama can probably really stymie Clemson's offense. The problem is Clemson can probably stymie Alabama's. And what you end up with is a very low-scoring game, and those games tend to be able to go either way.
All right, and since we're already talking about scores, why don't we go ahead and get in the computer model? We've been trying to get into these earlier, but I also know the score that the computer model came up with, so I want to talk about it a lot. So why don't you go ahead and get into the computer model, and let's just talk about this.
Okay, so we generate our model based off per play averages. Everything's weighted against, not just weighted against your quality of your opponent, but we look at what you did against each opponent, what your opponents did against the other teams they played. And we see, well, how good were you relative to what your opponents faced? So everything is based off, it's actually based off what your opponent saw more than, what you did to your opponent more than what you did yourself over the course of the season in a lot of ways. And Clemson and Alabama, their defenses are both excellent. Alabama is probably a little bit better than Clemson, but they're both elite. Anything under 70% rush of opponent rush averages allowed is excellent. Alabama allows 63% of opponent rush averages, which is phenomenal. One of the best marks we've ever seen. Clemson allows just under 70% of opponent rush averages. Against the pass, Alabama allows 75%. Clemson allows 78%. Again, both those are excellent marks. The one thing that's, I think, kind of interesting and maybe cuts against what some people would expect, there's always a reputation the SEC is very run heavy, and that the ACC is a little bit more wide open pass heavy. But actually, Clemson has faced the better run teams, and Alabama has faced the better pass teams. They're pretty similar down to a couple tenths of a yard, but there's actually something of a statistical edge there. So I think it's notable that Clemson and Alabama allow the same, for example, the same amount of yards per attempt. It's just that Alabama's passing opponents, while not necessarily stellar, are still better than what Clemson's faced, in large part due to the ACC being a little off kilter. Most of Clemson's average comes from Auburn, Louisville, and then Wake Forest. And then you got way too many teams like Boston College, Virginia Tech this year, Syracuse even, Georgia Tech, North Carolina State, Florida State especially, South Carolina, even Miami. None of those teams have had decent pass averages. So regardless, really both teams in both run and the pass are elite defenses. These are very, very good. The offenses, Alabama holds a significant statistical edge. Clemson averages 4.76 yards per carry, 6.9 pass. Alabama is a yard and a half better on the run and about a yard and a half better on the pass. So that comes out to, when you put it all together, compare the defenses versus the offenses, our projection is about 4.1 yard per play for Clemson. Only 3 yards per carry, only about 5.2 yards per attempt. Per carry averages have been quite poor by Clemson against Alabama in the past, but they've made up for it by great passing attacks. I think it's fair to say Kelly Bryant isn't Deshaun Watson. That's not a dig on Bryant. Deshaun Watson is probably the next franchise NFL quarterback. So you end up with only about a 4.1 yard per play average. Alabama, still going to be held to about 4.15 yard per carry, which is going to be a really darn low mark for them. And again, we've talked about them being a run first team. Anything over 4 yards per carry is enough to sort of work. It's not enough to take over the game by any means, but it's functional. And so I think a difference here is Alabama is functional against running the football. Clemson probably will not be. That's our projection here. And then against passing the ball, they're only predicted to have about 6.5 yards per attempt, which is not a great mark, but again, functional. So 5.2 yards per play, or 5.02 yards per play. 4.1 Clemson, 5 for Alabama. All right, a lot of talk. Haven't gotten to the score. Trick is Clemson scores better than Alabama. They put up an incredible amount of scoring production for the offense they generate. A lot of it's been off defense, frankly, but a little bit of it has been off the ability to sort of consistently sustain drives and generate explosive plays when they need to. So despite a significant per play advantage, basically saying that Alabama should outgain Clemson, the score is dead tied. To be exact, 22.8 for Alabama, 22.8 for Clemson, 22.7 for Alabama. So 23-23 score projection, probably the closest we've ever had.
And that's why I want to get into the score. 23-23. I think what's interesting about this is what we've noted in games in the past, and we see it here, how because we use yards per play, it doesn't always come out that the team with the more yards per play is going to be the team with the more points because of what you talked about, scoring efficiency. I wonder, though, if we also consider the fact that, Alabama being at full strength on defense is something that hasn't been able to show up in the numbers all year. And maybe that changes your opinion a little bit. Real quick on that, I don't want to talk a whole lot about it because it's kind of in theory, but with Alabama getting these players back, although with losing Sean Deion Hamilton, do you think it would change these numbers a little bit in Alabama's favor?
I think it has to be positive, right? You have to expect that getting some of these guys back will make a difference. And for Clemson fans that aren't familiar, over the course of the season, every Alabama starting linebacker has missed at least one game. And I'm trying to run through in my head. Every backup Alabama linebacker has missed at least one game. And I think it was really, what was it, Mississippi State game? So they're out, both starting outside linebackers. Their first starting inside linebacker. They had the second guy. He was, okay, so that's Evans. Evans was there. So now you're down to your backup outside linebackers and your backup inside. The backup inside linebacker broke his foot. The backup outside linebacker, one of them sprained his ankle. The other guy, I want to say, was it Mosley? I believe he was hurt too. Yeah. And so it was at one point 7 out of 8 of their top 8 linebackers were out. And I think people know their linebackers were out, but I think a lot of people understand maybe the starters were out. I don't think they understand, no, the starters were out and then the backups got hurt, or they were hurt about the same time. And so they were playing at times the third or fourth string linebacker at some of those positions. It's a really significant change if Alabama is healthy. And we don't know what it looks like because, for example, the starting outside linebackers played half of the Florida State game, and they played from their first game back with about quarter of the game each against the Iron Bowl. I think that was about right. And I don't think they looked full speed. And Alabama had a true freshman 5-star linebacker that they finally got ready and put in as the middle linebacker against Auburn, and he sprained his ankle in the first quarter and had to go out. And they put in the other guy that was coming off a broken foot. He couldn't really play, so they taped up Dylan Moses' ankle and put him back in with a sprained ankle. We don't know what Alabama's starting linebackers look like. We really have no clue. I will say that they are probably better than they have been the past few games. And you'd think they're probably at least as good, even without Sean Dion Hamilton. I think a healthy Mac Wilson, who's the backup middle linebacker, and again, another 5-star, probably is a solid guy, him or Moses. But especially the two outside linebackers, they're most Terrell Lewis and Christian Miller were supposed to be the pass rushers and haven't played all year. I have to think they're at least a little bit better. And I don't know if they're going to be a ton better against the run, because actually Anthony Jennings, who has played all year, is really the guy that plays in run sets. But when we're talking about scoring production, a lot of that is based off disruption, your ability to create turnovers. And especially for Alabama, the problem has been getting off the field in third down. And they've missed everybody they need to play in passing sets. They've missed the pass rushers, and they've missed the linebackers that play in passing sets. They should be better. So at the very least, I would think the numbers that we have in front of us probably underrepresent Alabama defensively a little bit. And I guess my point is, I don't know if they do in the per play stat in terms of how many yardage Clemson will get. I think it's more in terms of 1 or 2 third down conversions here or there, or 1 or 2 turnovers. And one of the big points I'd made is since September, going into the Mississippi State game, Alabama had at least 7 tackles for loss all the way to Mississippi State. And then once they lost those linebackers against Mississippi State and Auburn, they had 4 tackles for loss and 5. And when you play a team that is a run-first offense, the big thing for them is to stay on schedule. And the way you knock them off schedule is by getting a tackle for loss. Because, if you run the ball for just 3.5 yards per carry and you get it every single play, you always get a first down. You always score. The problem is if you run for 4 yards per carry, but on that third set, you get a first down, and then you take a single 2-yard loss on first down. Now it's 2nd and 12 and you can't convert. Alabama has not been able to do that at all the past few games. And I think not a lot of it, I think it's almost entirely due to the injuries, particularly at middle linebacker. And again, even the guy that's been playing, Rashaan Evans, has had a very serious groin pull that caused him to miss time. And as I understand it, it's basically gutted out that. So I do think, that's probably a huge X factor. One we can't project as a scoring factor, but given that these teams are deadlocked, maybe that does give Alabama a little bit of an edge.
All right, so let's do this. I want to explore what this game looks like if either team wins. So tell me what you think the score and sort of the game looks like if Clemson wins this game, and tell me what you think the score and the game looks like if Alabama wins this game.
I think if really likely that this is going to be a low-scoring game regardless. I think if Clemson wins the game, I think you're going to see probably Clemson score, I'm going to guess about 24 to 27 points. Alabama's going to score 14 to 17. It's going to look, in a lot of ways, probably similar to the Iron Bowl. Not quite as inept offensively for Alabama, but even in the Iron Bowl, oddly, Auburn didn't have a ton of yardage in a per play sense. They mainly just did a very good job of sustaining drives. And I think it's similar. If Clemson sustains drives, if they convert more than, let's say, 50% of third downs, they probably end up winning this game, probably score in the low 20s. Alabama's probably in the high teens. If Alabama wins the game, I think there's two ways that can happen. The first way is if they get everybody healthy and they come in, I think it's possible that Alabama could completely shut down Clemson and hold them to 14 points or less. And it's not ridiculous or absurd. Again, Alabama has done this repeatedly to people in recent years, and Clemson doesn't have Deshaun Watson, and they're much better suited to stopping this attack. I haven't seen that happen. I don't predict that to happen, but there is that X factor in the fact that they have probably been the most injury-prone defense in college football, and they will be healthy. We don't quite know what that means. The more likely result if Alabama wins is that you do have a low-scoring game, and if you want to think about it last year, it's a little bit similar to last year, only the game doesn't drag out quite as long, and Clemson doesn't have a chance to come back. And it's kind of the opposite result. Alabama scores, let's say, 28 points. Clemson only hits about 17 to 21. Alabama squeaks out a win. I mean, your most likely result is a team in the mid-20s beating a team struggling to hit 20 on either side of the ball, and it's difficult to say which one is which.
All right, so go ahead and give me your gut score. Give me two scores. One if Tua plays 3 possessions or more, and one if he doesn't play at all.
I think and this is always a fun thing, right? Because you say if they play the backup quarterback. Alabama will not play the backup quarterback unless they are convinced that it's going to be a positive. So if he plays, he is going to be ready to play, and he's going to be a factor in the game. And if that happens, I think Alabama might actually hit 30. And I think you'd end up with probably a 31 to 21 score from Alabama over Clemson. However, and by the way, 21 points, that's by no means an insult. Alabama's only given up 20 points 3 times all year. And of those 3 times, one of them was garbage time to Colorado. So that you're comparing yourself to Mississippi State and Auburn, which statistically are actually, frankly, better offenses than Clemson this year. Clemson's defense is better than either of those teams, but offensively, they're probably better. If Tua does not play, then this has all the hallmarks of a struggle win. I'll throw out my gut score of Alabama 24, Clemson 21. I do think, and that's really just me. I think there's just a million scenarios, and this is more of a way the ball bounces. But on the whole, if you were to take the average of all the results, I think the health of the Alabama linebackers gives them an extra 2 to 3 points that our model isn't seeing. And that's why I go with 24 to 21. But I do think this should be a low-scoring, very competitive ball game.
All right, for me, I think if Tua plays 3 series or more, I like your Alabama score of 31. I'm going to go 31-20 Alabama. If Tua does not play, that tells me that they're not ready for him to play at all, and that they're seeing things that we're not seeing. And Jalen, against really good defenses, what we've seen so far is the best they've got. If that happens, I think Alabama loses. I think they lose something like 21-17 because it tells me that they don't have the one thing they need in that to take advantage of Clemson and that good defense, and that's a quarterback that can make not come out and throw it around the field like a Baker Mayfield, but a quarterback that can keep them honest in the run game and allow them to be who they are DNA-wise, which is a running team. I just don't see it. 24 points against LSU, 27 points against A&M, 14 points against Auburn, and this is a better defense than any of those. Jalen has consistently shown, I think The offense had like 14 points against Washington last year, 20 or 14, 17, something like that. 10 points against LSU last year. For Alabama to score 25 or 24, 27 points offensively against an elite defense with just Jalen Hurts at quarterback, they're going to have to do something that they have never done with him at quarterback. I get that they scored 31 last year against Clemson, but a lot of that was because, and I think this is an interesting point, everybody likes to point out that Jalen Hurts, when the pressure's on, he's cool and calm. But I would argue that in his mind, he had resigned himself to losing at that point against Clemson, and he played with no pressure because the game was already lost, and that final drive happened. I think there's no pressure for him, or not as much pressure in practice, and that's why he won the starting job. There's not as much pressure for 9 out of 10 games that Alabama plays against any given opponent. He knows he's going to win, so there's no pressure. There wasn't pressure against Clemson at the end of that game, so he was able to do that game-winning drive, to his credit. But if you look at where they are on third down with him as a quarterback against the 4 or 5 really good defenses, it's something like 17% they convert. It's something crazy. So I have very little faith in their ability to win with Jalen and just Jalen, and I would love to be proven wrong. I just think we're going to have to see something that we've not seen yet from him offensively. So long-winded rant. I think I said 31-20, 31-21 Alabama if Tua gets in for 3 series. I don't think Tua should start. I think Jalen is the starting quarterback. I think Tua should come in for a change of pace to show them something different. I'm not sure that he will. Do you think I'm crazy in that? I know it's a little different from your score, but do you, like, how confident are you about an Alabama win if Jalen and only Jalen plays?
I'm really not confident at all, and that's what I was trying to get across. If Alabama was at the same position at linebacker that they were against Auburn, if that was the exact same team, I would have predicted Clemson to win. The only reason I'm giving Alabama a very slight edge, and we're talking 1 touchdown, 1 bounce of the ball, is I think the health at linebacker may allow them to generate one pick six, 1 turnover that gives them 7 points to go from 17 points and losing, like your projection, to 24 and winning. But that's a pure guess projection. And I'll also say, I think this game has a real danger of being a, 2011 Alabama LSU 6-3 sort of nightmare to watch. I mean, there's just, the defenses are such good matchups for the offenses, and both these teams have shown a tendency to slow down tremendously against good defenses that it's very concerning for both teams.
And that's kind of what I hate about this game in particular. I felt a lot better about the game we just recorded with Georgia and Oklahoma, in that we're so data driven, and this game we're having to discuss so many things that aren't data, either injured linebackers or backup quarterbacks, things that are not only unknowns, they're things that don't immediately contribute to the data that's feeding our computer model and our predictions. So I don't like that part about it. And I think in that regard, like you just said, if we're looking at the same team we saw in November, I agree. I don't think they beat Clemson. I don't think they beat a few other teams on their schedule, honestly. And so there's a question here of, 1, where's Alabama at quarterback? And 2, where are these players that are coming back? Because Holland and Lewis both played against Auburn and looked slow and rusty. I think given a month to get really healthy, they'll probably look better. But is it going to be enough? Because if Jalen plays, and only Jalen, and Alabama needs to win this game, they are going to need to win a really ugly 9-6 LSU kind of game, and we'll see. So anything else on this game before we wrap it up?
Nope, I think that's about it for me.
All right, y'all, you know the drill. In the comments, give us your score, give us your MVP. Let us know what you think about it. Back it up with data, and let us know what you think the score is going to be if Tua plays and if he doesn't play. Once again, thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.